One thing you may not know about me is that I am a major league fan of Dolly Parton. I love her wisdom, I love her generosity, I love her musical abilities, I love her good business sense, and her ability to say things in ways that are true, simple, and plain. For instance, one of the things she says often is, "It takes a lot of money to look this cheap." There was a quote from a movie she was in called Straight Talk that relates to the passage we just heard from John's Gospel. Dolly's character ended up somehow on the radio giving advice to people calling in. And during one call, this listener was going on and on and on about how unfair her life was. Her children continually took advantage of her. They were grown and they depended on her for money. They asked her for childcare beyond what was reasonable. And they always insisted that she cook for them. And she was unhappy because her children were not trying to make her life easier and happier. She just felt like they were using her. Finally, Dolly interrupted, saying, "Oh, get down off the cross, honey. Someone else needs the wood." That is one of my favorite lines in the world. See, the caller thought of herself as a martyr. She believed she had no choice in how she was living her life, when in fact, she chose to continually let herself be used by her kids. And rather than celebrate her as the martyr she wanted to be known as, Dolly reminded her that she was making a choice to be used. She didn't have to continue making that choice. Now that story relates because many early Christians believed that Jesus was a martyr, that he was killed because of his commitment to his mission, and that he was powerless in the hands of temple authorities and the Roman Empire. Therefore, early Christians, many of whom believed Jesus was a martyr, they thought he had no choice but to die on a Roman cross. Now, John was the last to write his gospel, the last we know of anyway, and he knew what people were saying about Jesus. And John wanted to set the record straight about Jesus' death on a cross. In John's gospel, Jesus wanted it known that he was in no way, shape, or form a martyr. In fact, Jesus made the choice to sacrifice himself on the cross. Jesus, in John's gospel, knew he could have avoided the cross at any and every point. Jesus chose to leave heaven to come to earth. Jesus chose to leave his home in Nazareth instead of staying there where he would have a peaceful and comfortable life. He chose to not say a word in front of the Sanhedrin, in front of Herod, or in front of Pontius Pilate. He chose to go to the cross, and he could have prevented it at any time. John's Jesus wanted his followers to know that he was not a martyr. He chose to sacrifice himself because of his love for God and God's people. Jesus loved his followers and all of humankind enough to lay down his life for his friends. Jesus' commitment to his beliefs, his mission in God, meant that he faced consequences because of his beliefs. But it was a choice he made, fully understanding the consequences. Now this was important because John wrote his gospel during a time of persecution for Christians. Christian teachers, in fact, were being arrested and sent to exile to prevent spread of Christianity. The book of Revelation was written by somebody who took John's name, and he was a Christian teacher who had been exiled from his communities in order to stop Christianity from growing in that region. It didn't work, but they tried. Now in later years, when Christians were being thrown into the arenas with gladiators and wild animals, Christians were believed to be martyrs for their faith. Martyrs quickly became thought of as saints. Now the problem is the early church had the same mistaken belief about martyrs as Islamic extremists today. They believed if they died because of their faith, they would easily and quickly get the best spot in heaven. At one point, so many people were volunteering to be martyred, the Christian church outlawed martyrdom. So the next time we feel like we're up on the cross because we have no choice, remember the church outlawed martyrdom in the 3rd century. John's Jesus wanted his readers to know following him would have consequences. Following Jesus meant living a life filled with justice, generosity, kindness, compassion, and humility that was not appreciated by those who followed the rules of the empire. That was why John's Jesus had to make sure his followers knew following him was a choice. They could choose not to follow Jesus, but the choice was theirs to make, and there would be consequences, regardless of what choice they made. Now, we often feel stuck in situations in life where it feels as though we have no choice. For instance, this past pandemic has been that kind of situation. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, told us that the safest choice was to stay at home. And if we left home, we were urged to wear masks, disinfect everything we touched, and wash our hands long and often. Don't shake hands, don't hug, don't get within 6 feet of another person. And many of us felt trapped by circumstances beyond our control and by powers that wanted to impose their will upon us. And the more trapped we felt, the easier it was to believe we were martyrs to the pandemic. More than a few people told me that they were experiencing the kind of sorrow, the kind of grief, the kind of anger and anxiety that came with feeling they had no choice. They felt trapped and believed that they were martyrs to the pandemic because there was no choice as how to behave. Now the reality was we all had choice whether to go out or stay home. We just didn't necessarily like the consequences of going out. We all had the choice of whether we would wear a mask or not. We just didn't necessarily like the consequences of not wearing a mask. In this case, it felt as though we didn't have a choice because we didn't like the sacrifices that came from staying home and staying safe. But rather than acknowledge we were making a choice, many of us decided to feel like martyrs to the disease or the government or government agencies. Choosing to stay home and stop the pandemic was a painful sacrifice. But sometimes sacrifices are painful. Just read the record of what Jesus had to say on the cross. Another, for instance, as parents, we want to provide for our children. We want to make their lives easier, healthier, happier, better, safer in every possible way. And every action we take as parents is to accomplish that goal. But we make those actions as a choice. How much we sacrifice our lives to make our children's lives better and easier is a choice. Like the woman in the movie. There are times when it can feel like our children, as they get older, and as they get older, and as they leave the home, or decide to stay in the home, it can feel as though our kids are taking advantage of us. And the longer we choose to allow our children to use us, the more it feels like we're martyrs. And in reality, however, we're making the choice to sacrifice more than is probably healthy for us or our kids. But we don't want to suffer the consequences of choosing to stop letting our kids use us. Because often the consequences will be them walking out the door, slamming the door, and ending up on the streets. And we don't like the consequences of that choice. So we make other choices. But whatever choice we make, there will be consequences. And here's the deal. If we end up feeling like a martyr, we're making the wrong choice for everyone involved. If we end up feeling like a martyr, we are making the wrong choice for everyone involved. Now, following Jesus is a choice that will have consequences. Because Jesus asked us to follow him with everything we are and everything that we have. He asked us to give him our very lives. He asked us to use our time and our abilities and our resources to serve God by serving God's people and God's creation. He asked us to lay down our lives if necessary. Now, he didn't say we have to, but he asked us to choose how we would respond to his invitation. Jesus does not force us to do anything. We are not victims of spiritual abuse. Jesus never asked his followers to be martyrs. He asked them to choose to live lives full of humility, love, and sacrifice. He asked them to live with the results of that choice. There are consequences if we choose to follow Jesus, because we still live in a time when the rules of the world and the culture around us seem very much like an empire. And an empire will always consider us to be silly, foolish, and illegal. We will meet people and institutions that want to take advantage of us or to stop us if we choose to continue. We will meet both gratitude and scorn. But if we choose to live the life Jesus invites us to take, we will experience the greatest joy anyone can have. We will experience the joy of helping others make our world more like heaven and a lot less like hell. We will experience the joy of growing closer to God, and we'll experience glimpses of heaven on earth. And the more all of Jesus' followers choose to sacrifice, the more glimpses of heaven on earth we will have. We will experience eternity with God. We can choose not to follow Jesus, but there are consequences for that choice also. Amen.
Amen.